shifting topics a little bit to the NDA side of the house, the second part of the question with the businesses that I work with is, how do I protect my idea when I'm pitching something online, and the whole NDA aspect with investors? What's your viewpoint on that in terms of, yeah, I've never seen an investor sign an NDA.
They sure don't like to, right? Investors are paramount in risk reward balancing and risk mitigation. I mean, that's what they do for a living, right? So from their point of view, signing an NDA only increases their risk, right? Because it's essentially one-sided. You, the innovator, are giving me, the investor, confidential information, and I'm agreeing not to do certain things with that information. Otherwise, I face some sort of liability. So of course they don't want to sign them. What I usually advise people on this topic is to say, hey, look, Mr. Investor, as you know, public disclosure of innovations has a tendency to erode their value. And to the extent that you're considering an investment in my company, in my innovation, it's actually in your best interests to sign this NDA, because not signing it may hurt the IP that you might be investing in. So let's think about that for a little while before we just flat out say no to signing an NDA. And that usually at least starts a conversation.
So if you were an investor, you would sign an NDA?
Well, I'm not a professional investor, and I haven't studied the risk rewards there, but as an attorney, I'm happy to sign an NDA all day long, because my whole career is about protecting people's secrets. I'm not going to go out and disclose anything to anybody.
Right. I think is because the type of career that you're in, the kind of industry you're in, it's a little different. Because if that person, I mean, ultimately, I think this is, as someone who used to really be in that field a lot, I mean, I'll get a lot of people who would ask me to sign these things too. And I think to me, it was always, well, I'm not going to sign it, number one. But number two is, what happens 5 years from now when this one conversation when I had with here, now I've invested in this other company here.
Right.
I didn't invest in this guy because I just didn't think that they were the right team. The idea was fine, but they're the right team, and a plethora of other things with a problem. Then 3 years later, 5 years later, I meet this other person. Everything's perfectly aligned, and I invest in that. But I signed this thing, so technically, I'm breaching of contract. I mean, when you see a lot of portfolios like this, when you see a lot of businesses in your portfolio like this, it doesn't make sense for an investor to go in there.
Understood. And I don't disagree with that. And I don't think my previous answer necessarily changes 9 out of 10 investors' minds about signing an NDA.
Sure.
But what it can do is start a conversation about, well, hey, can we take this in steps rather than me giving you the secret sauce of my whole business in pitch number one, where you're not going to sign an NDA? Maybe because you understand that publicly disclosing this to you without an NDA might damage the IP rights. Maybe you permit me to disclose only part of what what I need to tell you ultimately, not under NDA. And then if you really get interested and you need to know the special sauce, we have another conversation where we figure out a way to solve this problem. I mean, another way to solve the problem is to file for protection before you make the disclosure to the investor, right?
Yeah, I mean, not to mention most people who are hearing that conversation aren't going to understand the technical aspect of it anyway, right? And so you're going to have to, 1,000 songs in your pocket affect that, so that people can actually understand the I mean, especially if it's a technical aspect of it, right?
Right.
That's true. Think about it. When Steve Jobs said that, I mean, it's not like MP3 players weren't popular. Apple wasn't that popular at that point. They weren't on an upswing at that point. They were selling crazy colored iMacs at that point. So the singular device wasn't doing it, but he said something that made it easy for people to understand. And I think that's what made the upswing of MP3 players become what they were. Were they MP3 players at the time? Yeah, I think they were. Who knows? That was so long ago. So when you were in... you good on that question? Do you want to say anything else on it?
No, I just want to say it introduces sort of the overlap between NDAs and filing for IP protection, to consider those things together, because where you might not be able to get an investor to sign an NDA, if you file, for example, a provisional patent before you make that disclosure, you have an alternative form of protection that protects you even if the investor won't sign the NDA, or at least gives you some protection.